Hello. Let me check in with a footnote from Don Quixote. This is it comes from a footnote of a section which I will describe once I get back to it. The footnote itself says, "It was commonplace when people suffered a misfortune to say that it helped reduce the number of sins they would have to atone for." And the context is about they come upon this maiden who is weeping. Actually, they come upon this maiden who has been dragged to Sancho Panza because she's dressed as a man, dressed kind of very gaudily, but is obviously a very beautiful maiden, which they are quite struck with. And the maiden ends up saying, like, what has happened. Your grace should continue, Senora, and finish telling us what has happened. For your words and your tears have us all in suspense. It's like, well, what's the big misfortune, the big mystery here? And we're kind of expecting a big payoff, but indeed it turns out, well, in some ways, there's not much of a story to tell, and that her misfortunes, actually, I think are valid for her. Basically, she is the beautiful daughter of this husband whose the wife has died, and he's basically clamped down on her, forced her to stay in their family home and never ever leave, like to the point where she's not seen other men other than the tax collector who's come to the thing. So, it's one of these. It's almost you're almost at the level of someone's been kidnapped and held in a room for like months and years, and they've finally gotten free. So in some ways, I think the maiden has a thing. Now, Sancho Panza and the rest of the people there is like, oh, well, he's an overprotective father, and yeah, he's kept you cloistered. That's a big deal. That's what happened to the thing. But one of the things that she says is this: "I have few words left to say," responded the maiden. Okay. "I have few words left to say." This is on page 780. Responded the maiden, "but many tears to weep, because badly placed desires cannot bring any reduction, only more of the same." And this is where you get that cannot bring any reduction, and that's reduction of reduce the number of sins that they would have to atone for, which it kind of struck me as just an interesting thing to pause upon, because it's the idea of like, oh, the more you suffer, that means the less number of sins you're going to have to atone for in like a Catholic purgatory situation after you die. Like that's obvious. That's one of the things. There's the whole thing of you pay the church to pray for your sins, to as it's kind of a financial way of paying off your sins. And this is like another thing of like, you suffer a misfortune to say that it helped reduce the number of sins that they would have to atone for. But it's one of those things of, you think about it in a modern context of, a lot of times people look at people who've not suffered misfortune, and they say, well, that's great that you haven't suffered as much as like this other person here, but there's an implication there that because of that, you've had kind of a lesser depth of experience. You're lesser of a rich of a person because you have not gone through suffering and misfortune, and that suffering, misfortune builds character, that it makes someone into a better person, maybe a stronger person, or a person that's got more knowledge of the world than somebody is like, oh, well, you were born rich and you never suffered anything, and you're good looking and all that stuff. That's maybe something that you think about, that if you do suffer misfortune, that's one way of trying to console yourself. It's like, well, okay, I've suffered horrible grief and thing, but that's made me a richer, stronger person. It's kind of gotten transmogrified from maybe an earlier belief where, oh, I've suffered greatly. I mean, I've been held captive by my father for all these years of my life, but it's going to make me a stronger person. Though she seems to think that there isn't particularly going to be all her her weeping isn't, but many tears to weep because badly placed desires cannot bring any reduction, only more of the same. It's like, it's just gonna make me cry more. It's not gonna reduce my sins. To be weeping here and stuff like that. But I just thought that was an interesting thing, because like, what's the modern equivalent of that? And I can see kind of the modern equivalent of there's a way in which our society kind of elevates suffering, as this is something that makes you an interesting person. This is something that that will make you stronger. Whereas, sometimes suffering can make you a bore. Sometimes suffering can just consume you, that nobody else really wants to be around you either. I mean, it can go many different ways. I think you can be a compassionate, caring person, even if you haven't gone through what someone else hasn't gone through, just through hopefully kind of a power of being able to put yourself in another person's shoes. That said, I can still kind of, you can see the seductiveness of the thing of like, well, yeah, but if you've gone through something similar to what somebody else has gone through, you can probably be better placed to support them. Or maybe you end up perpetrating your own stuff on them as well, and involving them in unhelpful ways of coping. God knows a lot of people's way of coping with grief, sorrow can be, it's whether it's drinking, whether it's kind of obsessive behavior, whether it's withdrawing into themselves. There can be a lot. Just because you've had the suffering doesn't immediately give you the golden card to be able to help others or to be a better person for it. So it was just it was one of those little footnotes that in there of like the idea of like, oh, if you've had misfortune, the idea, the common belief, maybe not a dogma, maybe not a official church doctrine, that it will help you, that it'll atone for some of your sins that you've already had, because you've had suffering in this world versus suffering in purgatory or in hell and damnation, I guess, in the afterlife. So yeah, just a little thoughts on that part of Don Quixote on page 780. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later.